All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fuck Wellness. I'm Makena.
I'm Laura.
And I'm Mallory.
And today we have maybe the most special guest ever. This is someone who I really admire. I really respect, a mentor of mine, and just generally like a really, really cool person. And I'm so excited to have her on the podcast to kind of give her perspective on not only her life journey, but also her work as well and how that bleeds together. Amy Connor, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, what an introduction. You're so sweet.
I feel like I also need to say here, because no one can see your face unless you watch this on YouTube, but like Makena is giddy.
I am I'm a little bit nervous. So that's also it because I'm like, I really want this to be a fun time for you. And also it's just, I don't know, a special time. I feel like worlds are colliding in a way.
I love it. I'm happy to be here and share whatever I need to share with your listeners and help them through some transitions. So, my connection with you guys runs far, and my like I was thinking about like, who am I? What's my title? My friends call me a wizard. I am in fact not a wizard. I can guarantee this. But I guess you could call me a psychic medium, although I really don't like that term. So I usually say like, I'm an intuitive reader. I'm a spiritual teacher. That feels more comfortable for me, and I feel like people resonate with that a little bit more. So yeah, I offer readings for people who are generally coming to me because they're in a transition. And if they don't think they are, when we get off the phone, they realize so there's always people looking for guidance, whether it's like they're going through a spiritual awakening, or they're feeling like they want to leave a relationship or enter a new relationship, or change careers, or just like align themselves more with their purpose. It's always around transition. And I feel like we can all resonate with things shifting in our lives constantly. That's not something new for all of us. Hopefully they will shift and they will ebb and flow. But there can also be a lot of heightened emotions, as you guys, I'm sure, are aware of transitional times and what that means for us.
Totally. If you could give a quick kind of like overview of your journey into this work, maybe also the medical side as well, because I think that's something that makes you really unique in this kind of line of work.
So it's such a unique story because I didn't grow up with these feelings of like, oh my God, I'm seeing like dead grandma and I'm seeing ghosts and I can't get rid of them. Like that wasn't my experience at all. Looking back, I did have some really interesting, magical moments where I'm like, oh, things are obvious now. But at the time, like it just wasn't obvious. Thankfully, I grew up with like hippie parents in a really like hippie rural town where this kind of stuff was pretty normal. I don't want to say normal, but it was like you could find this material in local bookshops, and you could find like crystal shops, and you could have readings and that kind of thing. So in that way, it felt normal-ish to me, but nothing really showed itself until I was in my early 30s. And I felt like I had like my shit together and my life together, but I had a relationship that I was in for so long that I was like, what are we doing? And we both felt that way. And that really prompted me to go get a reading of my own. And the lady had told me that I was going to be doing this work. She's like, oh, you're going to be doing what I'm doing, but also with like a medical thing. And I was like, what the? I have no idea what you're talking about. And I have no idea what this medical intuitive, I've never heard of that term. So I left that reading thinking like I had to like change my life in the morning. And I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? Like, do I have to quit my job? Do I have to start something new? But in 3 months, I was getting somebody coming through from the other side who had recently passed. It was like a friend of a friend. I didn't even really know anybody involved. And I was like, oh my God, is this stuff real? Like, this is happening. And I knew what was going on, like health-wise, with everybody at the gym. And I was like, oh my God, that guy's gonna have a heart attack. Or like, just crazy stuff that I didn't know. Like, what do you do with that information? And it would just be like little, I wouldn't say a voice, like a word or a sentence that would pop in my head, and it'd be like lupus. And I'm like, oh my God, is she going to die? Like, what do you say to something like that? Because I was just getting like fragmented information. And a lot of people will say that when they start doing this work of like, I just got information. I didn't know what to do with it. It just like popped in. So I'm getting all this stuff, and I'm getting then like what somebody's purpose is. And it just kind of grew from there. And I really liked the medical side of things. So I studied with a woman who's a doctor and a medical intuitive and teaches this stuff. And I learned more about the human body and what chakras were. And I read like every book. I got like so many readings by so many people to verify, like, is this real? And everyone was like, oh, you're going to be doing this work. I'm like, oh my God, this is so crazy. So, yeah, it was a huge transitional time that got me into this work. That relationship fell apart, and was partially a catalyst for really finding my voice and finding myself and really jumping solidly into this work. It kind of all happened at the same time. So yeah, it's been a wild ride, and I started doing energy work along with doing readings because it was more comfortable for me than just being like, hey, sit down and I'm gonna tell you all about yourself. I was like, God, I was like dying inside, like, please don't ask me stuff. Like, I don't know if I'm gonna be right or not. So I started with energy work. And just as the years went by, and like I've done thousands of readings at this point and have really got comfortable with how it comes through for me and how to share information, I think is a really important piece of this work too. How to approach that and how to have a conversation with somebody. So yeah, it's been a really fun road. I've been doing this for, I don't know, 14 years or something like that now. And I love it. I really genuinely love being able to give people insight into their next steps and where they're at. And like, if you turn left, this is your opportunity. If you turn right, this is your opportunity. Not one is like good or bad or right or wrong, but like, hey, I want to show you your options. So always unique conversation, as you guys know, when you're having a reading. And it's really cool work. I can't imagine not doing this. It's
I
been really
wanna
meaningful.
I want to go back to the reading you got where the person told you that you were going to eventually do this work, because I feel like even though, I can't relate to that exact experience, like I feel like we've all had those experiences that sort of shatter a little bit of glass in our heads where we're
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, maybe this transition or this new path is something that I should consider. So could you talk a little bit about maybe the emotions that came up when you heard that, and maybe some of like the cognitive dissonance that you were feeling of like, oh, this is
So much overwhelm.
potentially a new thing, but not
Oh, I'm
sure
getting
even
hot
what
just
next step
thinking
to
about
do.
this. Yeah, so, a lot of like overwhelm, some excitement of like,
Yeah.
I could know about somebody and their life, and like I could know this stuff, and like how could I use this to navigate my life? It just seemed so almost unbelievable that like psychicness is even like a possibility. So
Mm.
for me, it was like had a cool factor of like, this could be something that I could do. And imagine if I could be like, oh, you've got cancer and you can cure it this way, or whatever it was in my head at that time. I thought was just so neat. It comes with a lot of responsibility though. And none of that, of course, came up at that time. I just thought like, oh, this could be cool. Really? Is this possible? And then the overwhelm of like, how do I transition? Like, I've always been self-employed. So that part wasn't scary to be like, oh, how do you go from a 9 to 5 to being self-employed and like developing a business? Like, I've always had different businesses. So that business for me has always been like a natural flow. So I didn't have any fear around that part, but it was just like, how does it all work? How is this all going to happen? So really that fear of the unknown and the anxiety that can come up in a transition, because I feel like anxiety can bring up, or transition, I should say, can bring up a lot of anxiety of like fear of the future, which I absolutely had, but it can also bring up a lot of grief of the past and that sadness of like, well, shit, if my life is going to be different, then what does that mean? Am I going to be living in a different place? Am I going to be like going to work in a different office? Who's going to be around me? What does that mean for my relationship? There's so many different things, components and feelings that come up around transition. It's not just about shift. It's about how are you dealing with the grief and the anxiousness that comes along with it. And that followed me for a while of feeling like, how do I manage this? It was about 2 years of a process from that reading on, where I took every class that came up. I read every book. Like, I had a massage therapist say like, oh, you need to read about Carolyn Mace. And I was like, who the heck is this? So it's like all of these trigger points had happened to make me go, oh, I need to know about this person or this thing, or learn a little bit about this. But yeah, it was 2 years of wondering like, how do I make this happen? But also having this deep faith of like, if this is supposed to be, then this could be a really cool, wild ride. And why not just like flow with it and see what happens?
I feel like that initial reading, I mean, your friends might joke that you're a wizard, but it feels very much like the you're a wizard, Harry moment of like Harry Potter, where I feel like if someone told me, I'd be like, is this a prank? Am I being filmed right now?
And looking back, I feel like, had I not listened to what she had said, and had I not been like, yeah, I'm going to do all these classes and read all these books, and if I was like, I'm good, I'm gonna keep selling houses,
Mhm.
I feel like it would have kept coming back around, because it's so ingrained in my purpose and what I need to be doing. It's so clear, like, this is what I need to be doing in my life.
Yeah.
And it's not just a job, but it's more of a purpose, and it's where I feel like most aligned spiritually. And I know it would have kept creeping back, where I'd be like, man, this is kind of crazy. Like, why does this keep coming up? Or why do I keep getting pulled to this material? Or why do I keep getting more readings and they're saying the same thing? So if you look into my astrological chart, this is so set up before like I even came into this planet. And there is something to be said about like what is our free will and what's pre-planned. And I feel like our free will is like 95% of our life, but there is some of that pre-planning of like your blueprint. What's your purpose going to be? How do you come into this world? Who are your parents going to be? What spot on the earth are you going to be? What sex and race are you going to be? Like, what's affording you your opportunities in this
Mhm.
lifetime? So those things I feel like are like pre-planned. But I also, having my chart done and not following too much in astrology, but from what I know, I've seen them go back to like, oh, you got your first job when you were 15 and you started developing, an important relationship at 16. Like, all these things had happened. So I have to believe that this was part of the plan too. And there's nothing I could have really done to get out of it. I feel like it would have kept showing up for me. And I think that's the same for a lot of people that are feeling like they're called into transition, whether it's like leaving a relationship or finding a different career. These things constantly come up for us and knock on our door in the way of repetition, people talking about them all the time, just getting that nudge, feeling like the flow and the ease and that path of least resistance is what the universe is trying to show you, of like, hey, take this is going to be easy, which means everything else is going to be harder, and you're going to get a lot
Mhm.
of shut doors on the other ways. But I do strongly believe that this would have shown up, and it will continually show up for people that are in transitions as well, of the direction they should really be going.
Yeah. I feel like with those things that are just so clearly right, it'll always keep bugging you, and then the nudges will get even bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
Um, but I can just say, like, personally, it's so helpful to, I trust myself a fair amount and I trust my intuition a fair amount, but it's so helpful to have the nudges, but then also have everything, like, have a reading with you and have things verified in a way that's like, okay, blue check mark. Like, I am
Mhm.
good to go now with those. Whereas, like, I don't know, I struggle with this because sometimes I'm like, and it's not, I don't think this at all, but sometimes I'm like, is it cheating of me to depend on, like, not depend, but like to have a reading done and get the check mark verification and be like, okay, now we're good to go. Whereas, like, I
Mhm.
know it would have, kept nudging, but sometimes, like, what would you say to someone who's kind of like, oh, well, that's like, you're getting a
It depends on
shortcut.
the frequency,
Okay.
because if you're like, I have to talk to you once a week, I'd be like, hold on,
Mhm.
this isn't benefiting you, because we're talking about the same stuff. And what are you shifting on your end that's then going to shift the energy that I read?
Mhm.
So I wouldn't see it as cheating. I would see it as having some clarity when you're feeling stuck, So a
Mhm.
reading is really valuable when you're at that pivot point where you're like, well, shit, do I turn left or right? Like, what are my options here? I would say a lot of times when people are feeling a certain pull of like, well, I kind of want to make this decision, like there's a reason why they're feeling that way. And I can confirm like, yes, this is the pathway. This
Mhm.
is not your imagination. However, there's also times where people will really get their anxiety mixed up with their intuition
Mm.
and feel like I need to pick this path, but it's coming out of fear,
Mhm.
not an honest, intuitive decision. So it's important to really look at, you're aligned with your intuition when you are not betraying yourself, you are not betraying the decisions that are meaningful to you, your boundaries, what is a non-negotiable, what is what is feeling like it's in the flow where all of the doors are opening instead of the doors that are shutting, that we've probably been taught by family and society that you just keep knocking on those doors even if they're hard, you just keep pushing. No, we take a pause and we look at like, what is working for me and what is not working for me. There's also something to be said with how the anxiety ties in with intuition, and I find that as my intuition has grown over the years, that the I've experienced anxiety over knowing something is going to happen and not feeling like I can control my way out of it. So it's not so much the anxiety of like, oh my God, is the sky going to fall? Is this going to happen? It's like, I just know this is going to happen. And now I'm like ruminating about it. And I'm like, God, like, so there is two versions of connecting your intuition with anxiety. One is like, am I making fear-based decisions? Is this coming from my heart? Is this just like stuff that I'm patterned to be afraid of, or this has just been my behavior? Or is it like, man, no, I just know this is truth. And now this is bringing me a lot of angst because I know this is coming down the line. I just had that the other day where I was like, good, I know this is going to happen with the house and I'm just freaking out about it. And it's like, oh, like what happened? What I was knowing was going to happen that I was having like genuine anxiety about. So you have to really look at what you're feeling around your intuition when it's like, do I turn left or do I turn right? And where is that coming from? Because when I'm reading you, it's just information.
Mhm.
I'm not caught up in the end result of what you choose because I'm looking at things from like a bigger picture of what is in the most alignment with your soul and your purpose. I don't care if you date that person or not, because that isn't the true alignment with your purpose and what you're here on this planet to do for 90 years.
Mhm.
That one person may be offering a lot of feedback in the form of a mirror to you and what you could learn and grow from and how you could teach that person. But it doesn't mean that that person being in your life or not being in your life is the end goal. The end goal is like, what do I take away from this when it comes to growth for myself? And what do I want to do with this to make sure that I'm not betraying myself? I'm honoring what my needs are.
As someone who also kind of like really trusts my intuition with a lot of decisions, I think it's an important thing to note that sometimes when I make a decision based out of fear, there are certain like factors with me specifically that I can immediately clock that are like, oh, you broke out, your face broke out. This was a bad
Mm-hmm.
decision. Or like, yeah, you immediately got sick. It immediately tracks with this decision that you made that crossed one of your boundaries because you feel obligated or you're people
Mm-hmm.
pleasing or whatever. Or
Mm-hmm.
I hook up with this person and then I have like a big reaction, right? Like there are these weird physical things, not weird, pretty normal. But I think for me, that's how it shows in my life. But I think everyone has that little thing, right? Like however
Mm-hmm.
it comes through of like how, I don't know, making the decisions that you're making is directly impacting you. You're reinforcing one belief or the other, whether it's fear
Mm-hmm.
or your intuition. So I just
Yeah.
thought that
And
was
it's
cool.
important to know like what you're saying about how your body's reacting is like so true. Because when we look at health and disease and what components are a part of that, like sure we've got like genetics and the environment and nutrition, but the emotions and the beliefs are like the biggest trigger. And what it is about the emotions is like how much anger, fear, sadness am I harboring in my body? Because as humans we have five emotions, Like we could call them all flowery words and whatever we want, but we've got anger, fear, sadness, love, and joy. Love and joy don't cause heart attacks. It like genetics that could be lurking, but it's like the stored anger, fear, and sadness that we have is the real component to why we're experiencing what we are. So I would say, Makena, like taking whatever that experience is for you and backtracking and being like, all right, what actual emotion is that and why am I feeling this way? Because that helps to kind of bring it forward so you can really honor, like, yeah, I've been feeling really fearful because. So 100% people should be looking at their emotional state and what emotions have been the most common, and they can really start to tie them to what's going on in their physical body. I had a huge transition when moving. It was almost 2 years ago. We did something really unique in COVID. We bought a house in the mountains and got a dog. So that was like a huge transition for me because I had owned the same home for 15 years and it was my little sanctuary. So to be like, hey, let's sell our homes and buy one together and, you know, we'll build this dream was like so exciting and just like my biggest dream. But when I thought about everything new grocery store, new friends, new people, new day to day, I was like, oh my God, this is like, that was the very first time I felt anxiety and had a full blown anxiety attack, like a couple of them, where I was trying to go for a walk. And I was down the street and I ended up having to stop on a curb because I was sobbing and trying to breathe at the same time and I couldn't. And I'm just like hyperventilating. And it was because of the unknown of that transition and the sadness of like leaving something that was ready to be left, but it doesn't take away any like grief or sadness that we have. We can even rationalize in our head of like, yeah, this is no longer serving me, so I've got this whole other dream about this whole other life that feels so exciting. It doesn't mean that you can't grieve what you've left. It doesn't just turn on and off like that.
Well,
But there's
also like your transition into that new kind of adventure wasn't
mhm,
without hiccups, right? Like I think
mhm,
that's also another huge thing of like, oh, well, following my intuition, maybe that just means that everything's going to work out perfectly. I'm going to have no bumps in the road, nothing
mhm,
that's going to give me anxiety. You know what I mean? But it's
yeah.
sometimes like just because it still is serving you like in the best way, that's the best decision for you. Doesn't mean that like crummy house stuff doesn't happen, you know?
For sure. And you bring up a really good point because a lot of people think that like having solid intuition means their life is going to be perfect. And it's not, you know, like, yeah, the whole house process, as you remember, was like really difficult. We shopped around for a house for like a year and we got beat out because everybody was writing offers for these crazy amounts. And, you know, looking back, the universe put us where we need to be, like our street and our neighbors, like the best humans in the world. And we're like, thank God we got this. So it's so funny how, again, like I could have knocked on all of those closed doors and been like fighting for like, no, this is going to be our house. What do we have to do? But it was like, you know, let's just be in the flow. It's funny because when we were in escrow, like it was, so my past life was in real estate before I got into this stuff. And I was in real estate like my entire life before moving into this. And so I, it was, our escrow was the worst escrow I've ever experienced in my life. And I was like, the universe, what is the universe telling me? And I realized then, and I realize now that if we really wanted this house, it would cause some angst and we would run up. It wasn't going to be smooth sailing. And that's what I took from that. Totally right. And it was like, all right, we love our neighbors, we love our hood, but oh my God, like one thing after another with this house that was so frustrating. We were like, we knew we needed to remodel it, but it was like, we pulled off some sheetrock in the garage because it was like sheetrock on sheetrock. Like, this looks so weird. There was a half empty can of motor oil that someone sheetrocked like into the wall. And we're like, this house, what is happening? So that was like summing up our experience with the house. So
As someone who's a fake adult, what is escrow again?
when you buy a house,
But
You
in
have an escrow
between?
period.
Okay.
So when your offer is accepted by the seller, that's when you go into escrow. So they hold all the money and they do some paperwork, some legal paperwork behind the scenes. So yeah.
And you discover things in little funny
The walls.
fossils in
Yeah.
sheetrock. That's so
Yeah.
funny.
After we bought the house. Yeah. Super
Awesome.
fun. Great stories though.
Mhm.
So good. I want to talk a little bit more about the grief part of transition, because I think, as you've brought up a few times, that is often what feels like the least talked about part of transitions. And it feels like it also has the most like shame around it, where you feel really bad that
Mhm.
you're like grieving a past thing. And I know in past transitions I've gone through, it's like, to your point with the house that you owned for so long, like there was comfort there. There was like stability there. And so deciding to move like also meant leaving that, which was exciting and great.
Right.
And like, had a lot of potential,
Yeah.
but also meant like putting yourself out in a way that you hadn't for a while. And I think we often don't give people enough credit for like taking that leap, but also like for taking the time to process the like grief and loss of so many things, of like that comfort, but also of like the friendships that were stabilized through that period or location or whatever. And I've been thinking about that so much because I'm, Ryan and I will go through transitions the next couple of years. And it's like, I feel like I'm already starting to grieve, even though like I haven't even gone into the transitions, but I'm like starting to be like, wow, this is going to be a lot of grieving. I've lived here for 9 years. Like I have all of these routines, and yeah,
Mhm.
it's something that I'm glad seems to be talked about more than, I mean, I was, I guess, little before, but yeah, I'm glad that we're talking about this more.
But I feel like you have to feel it,
Yeah,
whether it's anger, sadness, whatever it is, anxiousness, you have to feel it and understand like we have these emotions as humans for a reason. So, what is it that's bringing this emotion about for you? Because even in a transition, there can be a lot of anger. It's not all about grief either. And
totally.
so many people get angry that they're angry and they're like, why do I feel this way? And why is it coming up for me? And I'm feeling guilty for feeling angry.
Yeah.
Why aren't we making best friends with anger? Why aren't we looking at anger and other emotions as a mirror to us to be like, wow, what is it that brings up the anger in me? Okay, my boundaries were pushed. Okay, I ended up choosing a path that I knew my intuition was telling me I shouldn't choose. But why aren't we going, okay, anger is a barometer and it's
Yeah.
directing me to what I need to look at from the bigger picture. And all of our emotions really are that barometer of like, okay, if I'm feeling sadness when it comes to transition, like what is it that I'm mourning? And what am I looking forward to creating with this next chapter of my life? So I feel like it can be used in two ways. Like, sure, we can get into that emotion, and the emotions are always temporary. And we have to remember that it's a blip on the radar, even when it feels like our darkest day when we're in it. But we can look at those like, all right, if I'm feeling grief, that means I'm losing this great community and a lot of stability. But where can I then find that and then some? And how can I turn this around into something that I really want instead of getting so tied into what may be scary or what may not work? So I do see that it's an opportunity to really clarify our next steps and what we want and what things look like.
Yeah.
Something to kind of slightly shift gears. Something that you have taught me, and I feel like you are very good at, is having such strong boundaries. And with your work, one, it's just an incredibly vulnerable space to be with someone. They're either, like you said, in life transition or experiencing pain or experiencing some sort of something in their life. Like, I feel like very few people kind of come for readings that are like, everything is 100% perfect. And like those readings aren't very fun anyway, if they don't want to like change anything or work on anything. So I don't know. I just kind of wonder how you manage that personally and within work, because I feel like that's something that everyone could use a little bit more of, because day to day, like everyone's emotions are so high.
Yeah.
Even just like walking in the grocery store or whatever it might be.
Yeah. When I'm with somebody, I'm with them 1,000% in that session. It's a deep connection and channel that like I see everything that's happening and the best approach for them to make these choices. So it's like, I understand where they're coming from with these transitional times and these deep feelings, especially just like doing this for so long. It's almost like I can put the pieces together in a very organized way, and be like, here, like, this is what's going on, and this is how to kind of get out of it. But with, as far as like the boundaries go, I have, on a very like pragmatic level, I have a very clear schedule. These are the days I work. These are the times I'm available. I don't offer a schedule where like, well, whatever works for you, you just let me know, and we'll see how to give you, like, everything is very clear cut when it comes to boundaries. And I feel like that's an important starting point, because if I don't have those boundaries for myself, how am I supposed to teach other people about them? So it's important that I'm showing up in a way of being able to offer them some example of like leading by example, not just telling them what to do. Outside of work, I try to lead a pretty normal life where I'm not trying to read people at the grocery store. I'm not trying to like intervene with my friends unless they ask me for help. Like, I want to make sure that I'm still having those boundaries where I don't have to be an open book all the time, because doing readings is exhausting. And if I was to do 10 readings a day, I wouldn't be able to function. I wouldn't be helpful for the person I'm reading. It wouldn't be helpful for me. So I make sure that I'm very clear about like how I can serve, when I can serve, how long I can serve for, because I want to be good for the person that is showing up for me, and I want to be the best version of myself. So it's important also when it comes to boundaries that I'm not getting tied into the end game of the help that they need. I want to be able to come in and offer them a reading that comes from a higher perspective, that sees this is one lifetime of hundreds. This is one experience of a billion. And it's not so much about that exact event that's happening, but let's look at the bigger picture too, of what can we take from this? What can we learn from this? What can we teach from this? Like, why is this happening? And really getting in deeper about that. But for me, it's not being tied into the choices that they make and the end goal, because that's when intuition becomes really foggy. And if you're trying to read yourself and you're like, gosh, I want to like give myself a reading, and I want to see like the best course of action for myself, it's really hard because you're really tied into, I hope that relationship works out, or I hope I get this house, or I hope I move to this location. So it's untethering what that looks like and just being present for giving them the information is part of having boundaries too. Because if I'm tied into their end goal, they're popping up for me all the time when I'm like in the kitchen cooking some food. I'm like, oh, I'm thinking of so and so, and I wonder what's going on with that. That is not good boundaries, because that means that I'm now energetically like ported to these people, where they pop up into my head, and literally every 100% of the time they'll pop into my head, and within a week they'll schedule. And I'm like, we're so tied in right now. It's kind of fun, but it's also like I need to have those boundaries. And it serves the people that I'm connecting with better when I have firm boundaries too.
Is that hard to do when when you have a session and it's so connected? I would imagine it kind of feels like an episode of like a TV show that you then have to click off and never watch again, potentially.
I had, that's so funny you say that. There's this woman that I studied with, and someone had asked her like, so what do you do after a reading to like turn it off? She's like, I go watch an episode of Judge Judy.
Yeah. Something like
I don't have cable, so that's not my life. But
dang.
yeah, it's really interesting because like I will have these like really like profound conversations where whatever it is that comes up, and the other person's like, oh my God, this is what I needed to hear. And I will feel like I am just like flying high, but then I have to turn it off because either I have another client or whatever it is. Like, I have to keep everything compartmentalized. I can't let my mind go with like, and what if this, and what if like, I can't go there. So I have to like literally like shut things off and clear my energy after a session, so that it's not something that I'm taking on. I will find that like before, like in the morning of doing readings, a lot of stuff will come in when I don't ask for it, Like I'll literally be like making eggs and I'm like, oh, okay. So we're gonna talk about our grandpa. Hi, grandpa. Like he's here and this is like going to be a part of our conversation. So it seems to be clicked in with like, if I look at my schedule and see who's on it, then information will start flowing. But I'm okay with that. So like that part, I don't feel like I need to have like super firm boundaries on, because okay, cool. I'm getting information and it's going to be helpful. And you know, it's something that they're not asking me about yet. And I could just give it to them. But if it were like end of the day stuff, it's just not even allowed. And at this point, I've been doing this for so many years that like my guides know my rules and they're not going to be like giving me stuff that I'm not cool with. In the beginning, yeah, my boundaries sucked. Oh my God, I was so exhausted. I would do like energy work and readings and I would go home and I would sleep for hours in the afternoon because I was so tired and I didn't know how to manage my energy. As soon as I realized like, oh, I can manage it with like an intention, everything changed. And I was like, oh, okay, boundaries. That's a good thing. So we should all have them. They're not a bad thing. We all really need to have them. And the more that I can do that myself is the more that I can teach them to the people that I'm reading, because I don't want them to have to rely on me. I want them to rely on their intuition after we talk and know how to make a decision. I don't want them to feel like they have to call me every day to make a decision. That's not healthy and that's not serving them. So I want to make sure that I leave them with like quality, great information that they feel confident with.
Yeah. In regards to boundaries, do you feel like, just because I do view you as like, she's got it down, every single thing, I'm like, there's not a boundary that slips by. But I'm like, are there any parts of your life where you're just like, God, that one thing just keeps going? And I feel like I set up a good boundary with that.
So my life is pretty zen. I would not say my life is perfect. I don't think that exists. Unless you're like the Dalai Lama. I really honestly don't think that exists. I feel like us as humans are always working on whatever we need to work on. Growing up, my biggest thing was self-esteem, and I just didn't have it, and the choices that I made to fulfill that, I think, were the biggest crux for me. So like going from relationship to relationship, like I always had work dialed, like that was never a thing. I feel like relationships was always something that was like I was hopeful for, or I was like dreaming for, like, you know, really desiring, and that was on the top of my list. I have such a great relationship that I can't, like, it's just so night and day of who I used to be and who I am now. But it's come from a lot of work, a lot of realizing what my patterns were, realizing that I had lack of confidence and deservability. Like doing this work and working with people, I've learned so much about myself by giving readings. Like so much stuff has come in where I'm like, oh my God, I needed to hear this today. Doing this work has completely changed my life, the way I view the people in my life as spiritual assignments, what I can learn from them, what I'm teaching them, why we have the dynamic we have. So I don't want to paint everything as like picture perfect, but I don't have an area where I'm like, God, if I could only, like, you know, break through from here, because I've had those moments and I know what it's like to be on the other side, to be like, oh shit, I did a lot of work. And there was a lot of loneliness and there was a lot of self-loathing to get to the point where I'm at. There's never a point of perfection, and no one should ever think that no matter what aspect of their life they're working on, that there's some level of perfection. It's a level of comfortableness where you're feeling like, yeah, things are smooth. Things feel good. There's always these little hiccups, but I know how to navigate them now because I have more information. And I realize that the things come up when it's like, you know, do we remodel the bathroom like this or do we remodel the bathroom like that? Like, it's like, okay, what can I learn from this? Am I too controlling lately? And I'm feeling like that's something that I need to look at, of like, is this giving me feedback of like I should be less controlling? Like I'm always asking myself this of like, what do I need to learn from this? And I think that makes navigating life, work, finances, relationship, friendships so much easier when we're looking at it as like, what do I need to learn from this instead of why me? I used to be all about why me, of like, why is this happening to me? And why do I pick the wrong people? And why do I blah, blah, blah? It has nothing to do with that. And as soon as we start getting out of that, like me centered, like, why is this happening to me? And more about, what can I learn from this experience or this person? Like, what emotion does it bring up in me? And therefore, what can I learn? What does that mean that I've been bringing to the table? So if I look back, for example, like, all right, I felt really insecure for so many different reasons that brought me to really dysfunctional relationships when I was young. It wasn't that I'm picking the wrong person. It's that my self-esteem was already taking a hit before I even met those people. So those people were a match for where I was energetically, emotionally, and a mirror, a barometer to where I was. I didn't realize it at the time. But as the years progressed, I was like, oh, okay. So if I'm feeling really shitty about myself, I'm going to attract somebody who's also feeling pretty shitty about themselves, but they may show it in a different way. So I showed up as like the caregiver people pleaser, and I would be attracting like a narcissist. So we each come from a place of insecurity, but I would be able to see, I can see now looking back of like, oh, okay. So that was my mirror where I could be like, oh, so they're making me feel insecure. They're making me feel like I'm not good enough. Do I bring that to the table, and how? So if we look at these experiences like, all right, we can learn and take something from them when it comes to another human showing up in our life. It takes the charge out of things, and it is what is the biggest thing that inhibits, or I should say that allows growth for us. But we have to realize what our patterns are and how those affect the choices that we make and the people that we bring into our lives. So I just have a different perspective, I guess, now, on the choices that I've made and how it's led me to where I am. But God, don't think that like my life is perfect. Like no one's is. I still get irritated when my dog's like not coming back into the house and she's like, screw you, I'm out here, I'm not coming in. I'm like, bah, what do I need to know, universe?
What are you teaching me?
So yeah, there's still like, I still get frustrated. I still like, I'm a human, but I've learned to look at like, what do I need to take away from this with a lot more awareness now. So it just makes things easier.
I feel like that's such a hard shift to make, but once you kind of start practicing and like flexing that muscle, it gets easier and easier.
Yeah.
But I feel like I have a big tendency of getting into the like why me mindset, and my mind just goes and goes and goes and goes and just takes like all of these stories on. And I feel like I just want to say that I really appreciate that in your work you really encourage personal responsibility, which I think is sometimes not so present in the spiritual community and certain spiritual teachers. And I just think that I feel very grateful to have been connected with you. And when I first met you, I was like fully flailing and still kind of am, but in like a more, aware way, I guess. But I feel like something I really try and embody that you also embody is like that you get to be in the driver's seat also. Like you get to co-create, you get to be here fully present. Things aren't just happening to you and then you get to be like, I guess this is just my life, like I don't know. I think that's a really important component to talk about, especially when we talk about spiritual things and readings and all of that stuff.
But it's such a tough pill to swallow, because
so hard.
If we're like, what do you mean? Like, I'm creating all of this. And that could go real far off the scale too when we give examples. And it's not that we're saying like, bring me this one big disastrous thing in my life, but it's like, how am I feeling unempowered, and how does that produce all of these different things that are going on in my life? So it's about recognizing like, wait a minute, my life has not been figured out for me from the day that I've been born to the day that I die. And I think most people would agree if I said like, do you think your life and every little bit and piece that you're going to come across has already been figured out for you? I would say 9 times out of 10, if not more, people are like, no, because that doesn't really make sense of like, how
and
would
it wouldn't
things
be
be figured
fun.
out for me? Right?
Yeah.
And so if that's the case and you don't believe that it's been figured out for you, that means you create it. But that in itself is like mind blowing. Like, what do you insane. Like, it's like thinking about the universe being endless, right? It's like, I can't even go down that road. That is insane. But
Yeah.
it's true. So if we're creating it, how can we have anxiety about something that hasn't happened yet because we haven't created it yet? How can we sit back and watch things fall apart without going like, hold up, is this something that I would truly desire? And do I really align with this? It's easy to get into that pattern of like, oh, the shitstorm is happening. And it's hard to like stop ourselves when we're in the middle of it for sure. But it's like, wait a minute, is this my belief or is this a pattern that I'm finding myself believing? Is this my true truth? Or is this something that is just continuing? And I think that's a really valuable question to ask when you're in the midst of something of how do I genuinely feel with this? If I was rewriting a whole movie script, is this the script that I would write? Are these the people that would be in there? Would I kill them off? Would I keep them? Like what kind of movie would this be? But yeah, we as humans have so much more power than we've ever been taught. And the more we link in with our intuition, the more we really understand the truth in that of like, this is what we get to create. And of course we could talk about like Abraham Hicks and law of attraction and the nuts and bolts of manifesting, but it just really comes down to asking yourself, like, do you believe your life has been figured out for you, or do you believe that you get to figure it out, or a combination of both, right? Because we talked about like the blueprint of coming in and having an alignment of like what your purpose would be.
This reminds me, I was just talking to my therapist last week in therapy about the concept of like locus of control and the internal versus external locus of control. The best example I think for this is like if you show up to your doctor's appointment late, do you immediately default to being like, oh, it was the traffic. Oh, my husband got in the way this morning. Or are you like, well, I guess I could have also just left a little bit earlier, kind of what is your default? And I don't think we all default one or the other, but I was thinking a lot about how I think a lot of people in situations immediately go to like an internal locus of control, like, oh, it was me, it was all my fault, which I think on either end of the spectrum can go to an extreme that you don't is also not true, but you also don't want to end up in, or on the external of like so much externalizing the things you experience that you're not taking any personal responsibility. And sometimes I think it's helpful as if I find I'm like going to one of the extremes being like, okay, like what is causing me to want to either externalize this or like really blame myself for it. So I think it's fascinating.
But you bring up a good point, because if we look at the fact that we are co-creating our life, that can have sometimes with some people can have this element of like, oh, I'm going to control everything, which brings up a lot of anxiety. So there is a balance of, all right, I'm manifesting from a place of excitement and joy and love. I'm not manifesting from fear because that doesn't work, but I'm manifesting from like, this is what I truly desire and this is what resonates with me. What would be coming from a fear-based place is like, oh my God, like I need to make this much money, or I need to have this relationship, or I need to have like whatever, like not the want, but I need is a really scary place to come from. And that is never a great place to be like, oh, I've got control and I'm controlling everything that's going to be happening in my life. Not really. You're co-creating. You're not doing 100% of the work, because the universe still needs to come in and be like, oh, here's the timing of it. Or here's how I'm going to take you and your future partner and put you at the same place on this planet at the same time. Mind blowing in itself. So there's so many things that you can't control, but you can control what you're truly desiring and what that looks like and what it feels like to have alignment when it comes to purpose or relationship or anything else. So it's like getting deep in with that feeling of excitement instead of like writing your affirmations every day. Like, if I say this affirmation, then everything's going to be great, because I'm going to fear it if it's not. So definitely a balance of control when it comes to creation and kind of letting it be.
Sorry guys, I was like really curled up listening and I couldn't unmute fast enough. I was really in that. I was really listening hard.
No, same. That was a really cool question, Mel.
Yeah. I don't know.
I never
think
heard that.
What? The
Locus.
internal, external?
Locus of control?
I remember learning about it in psychology class and being like, well, this isn't relevant to my life. But then when my therapist brought it up last week, I was like, wow, this is like really interesting and cool. So yeah, the
That's
more you
funny.
know.
Oh, okay. Do you guys have any like wrap up questions we didn't cover?
Can I just add?
No.
There's a
Just
reason.
kidding.
Okay, bye. There's a reason why we all go through the shit we go through. It always feels like there's not a reason why we go through the shit we go through when we're going through it. But there are so many examples, literally like endless examples that I could give about the people I've read or myself, where it's like they had to go through all of these different events, a lot of them traumatic, to get to a point where they are serving their highest good. This is tough for a lot of people to like wrap their head around when it's something that would be, I mean, the most traumatic of the traumatic, like losing a child. It's like, why in the world would something like this occur and what's the benefit out of it? However, I have seen clients lose children and go into having a nonprofit, writing a book, having so many different ways to teach people and really align with their purpose that would have not happened in the same way had they not gone down the same pathway. So it could be as extreme as that, or just the series of relationships that we have and why we needed to meet these different people along the way to give us a better sense of who we are. And we would never be where we are at this moment with the belief in ourselves or even in a certain relationship if we hadn't gone through all of those different steps. So while it's easy to be like, all right, how do I just get to the end? It's not about getting to the end. It's like, how do you want to pick each stepping stone to get down to that? And we can work on what each stepping stone looks like and how to navigate it. But getting to the end would never be the same if you didn't take all of those steps. So it's going through a lot of these events that can really seem like unfair or cruel, which, yeah, absolutely. But there's always going to be something that can be the silver lining from that. And there's so much more interweaving that happens with us as humans and souls than we can even wrap our heads around when it comes to the people we need to meet and the experiences we need to have with them and the losses that we experience. Us as humans have a really hard time of seeing anything other than like what literally happened. We have to take a step back and be like, how has this been something that is within my soul growth? And how is this something that I can now teach from and really inspire other people? It's easy to be like, what the hell is happening today? This sucks and this is hard. But there's always going to be something that's a deeper experience. And I don't want to say a deeper lesson because we're not here just to like learn terrible things or like have things be difficult so we learn from them. It's more about these experiences that we're picking and choosing of how does this enlighten me? How does this get me closer to who I'd really want to be on a soul level? So it's important to look at things from that perspective as well, not just the literal thing. But I will tell you, I have seen so many events where people were feeling the lowest of low in the time. And then they realize after they've gone through it, a month, 10 years, there's never a time period of like that epiphany moment, but they're like, shit, like I'm still sad about that, but I can see why all of these choices were made by all of the people that were involved. So
To
keep
your
that in
point
mind when
too,
you're feeling that.
yeah, no
Yeah.
one escapes being human. Like no one escapes that
Mhm.
experience. And I feel like sometimes I mean, me personally, I can get really like I want to fight it. Like I want to be like, I'm in it so hard. Like right now, like there are so many unknowns and I want to fight
Mhm.
it so hard. Right. Cause I am in the mud. It's confusing. It's scary. I feel alone, like all of the things. Right. But I know that in like 6 months, even it's going to be okay. And then in 3 years, I'm going to look and be like, oh, well, that timeline actually made a lot of sense. Like it makes sense, like kind of where we got and where we were. And I don't know. I think that perspective is one that's really hard to have, but really important to be able to be like, I'm going to surrender on some level to just being this human.
I have
And
seen things change so fast for people. Like,
yeah.
There's this one person that sticks out for me. I won't say too many details. I like to keep my readings like private, so I don't really say too much about them. My partner doesn't even know. He's like, "Was work good?" I'm like, "Yeah," and that was it. I was like, but there was one person who was going through a breakup, and I was like, "I'm telling you, like a year from now, your life is going to be so different that like if I could put you in my brain right now, you would be like, okay, I'm good. Like I can hold on." A year from then, she was married and had a baby with not the same dude. So it was like things can like literally change so quickly that there is some comfort in that too, that you don't have to be on a certain timeline for anything. It's like, how fast do you want to experience this, or how slow do you want to experience? And do you want to be at the mercy of the universe, or do you want to fight it? Like, there's so many components about that, but it's really like maintaining that line of sight of, this is what I choose. This is what I want to create, and feeling that all the time, even if you don't know what the details are of like, where am I going to live? It doesn't matter. Just feel that feeling of like, oh, comfort, oh, alignment, like, oh, I love that I can, walk to a restaurant or whatever it is. Like, feel it. Even if you don't know the details of what you want to create, that's okay. You shouldn't know every single detail, but at least feel the energy of like the excitement that comes up around it.
Well, I feel better.
I just think that, like, I'm just really, 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 really grateful that myself and people that I love so much have had the opportunity to have sessions with you, because I think that it's a lot of the stuff we talked about today in this pod are just like hard pills that suck to swallow, but they're true. And I think that it's just I'm so grateful that, like, I don't know, talking to you, it's like these hard pills, but they're presented with so much love and care, and like, you can do it, kind of a feeling that's how I feel right now. So
Aww,
you're
so sweet.
I'm really, really grateful you came on.
I'm happy to help in any way that I can. Like,
Yeah.
it makes me so excited to see people have those moments where it's like, oh, I see things differently now. And it's not that I expect, 1 hour to be like some life-changing thing. If it is, awesome, that's a bonus. But I hope to at least leave people with some things to think about and how to apply them, so they can be like, all right, this is some area that I need to work on. So whenever this comes up, here's my plan of attack. And leaving those with some real, like, actual steps in life, not just, the ethereal stuff, but like, all right, and here's how we tackle this and this is going to come up for you, this is going to be your pattern, this has been your pattern since you're 6 years old, how do we want to change this pattern, here's what to do. So I like the idea of just leaving you with some things to think about and ponder, and then let you guys run with it.
Yeah. You're really, really, really good at that. I feel like every time I go into a reading with you, I'm like, I know I'm gonna get like a kind, like, reality check.
A kind spanking.
Slapping around. Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna
It'll
be
be good,
gentle
though.
with it, but it's important to hear. And I don't know, a lot of our audience is like mid-20s, and that's just like sometimes a really hard time of life where you're just like, what the hell are we doing here, you guys?
That was
Every
the
day
hardest
is a
for me.
kind spanking in your 20s.
Yes.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
We're all trying to figure shit out.
Yeah.
I don't care what your age is. We're all dealing with insecurities. Number one, period. Questioning our self-esteem, questioning, are we good enough? And we find that through, like, does work see what I'm doing? Does my boss like me? Is this guy like orbiting? Is he going to come back? Does he like me? Like, we always have these insecurities about who we are and who we hope to be. No one's escaping that. I have done thousands of readings, and I have yet to have one person that has their self-esteem completely figured out. I don't know if that exists. I think we all have these outside sources that are bringing us these like insecurities, but I would say that, no one's exempt from having these questions when it comes to transitions, when it comes to anything, and especially when it comes to the feelings of like deservability. That's at the core of seriously like everything that we could possibly talk about topic wise, is coming back to like, how do I feel about myself? Do I feel like I deserve it? Do I feel like I'm capable? Do I feel like I'm confident? Do I feel like I can have this? Do I feel like I matter? Some really valuable questions for your listeners to be asking themselves, because that is at the root of your finances, the job you will attract, the partner you will attract, your health. It all comes down to like, how do I feel about myself, and what decisions am I making that I believe that I truly deserve?
It's also like, that's a journey, right? Like, I remember like years and years ago, like you could write down 500 times, I deserve this, but that honestly doesn't really mean shit if you don't like
No.
actually feel it and
How do you
believe
apply
it.
it?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I feel like recently there's been some things in my life where I'm like, a switch like flicked on, where I was like, I've been like working on this, telling myself this thing for so long. And now all of a sudden I'm embodying it. And it's like, I'm going to say no to that. And I'm going to say no to that. And I'm going to say no to that. And I don't feel bad. Whereas even 6 months ago, I would have been like in a shame spiral about it. And it's so that transition happened because I experienced all of those things. Like, it wouldn't have happened if I just, again, wrote it down 500 times and like, oh, I choose to believe this now. Like, we're good to go. No, it took like brutal experiences sometimes.
But you're also reaffirming your boundaries, your deservability, your choices by literally like every choice you're making during the day is a part of your behavioral pattern. So it's important to take a step back when you're engaging with somebody or you have a decision to make and be like, what is the best course of action? Like, let me pause. So if you don't know how to have a go-to reaction, that's okay, but at least have a go-to pause where you can really look at that moment and have some clarity about, do I want to turn left or do I turn right? Like, which one's best serving me? So if you're trying to work on boundaries, instead of saying yes, and if you don't feel like you can say no, just say like, I'll get back to you. And that could be your answer. So it gives you a little bit of breathing room and some space where you don't feel like you have to commit to something. Half the time it just falls apart anyway, and you don't really have to do much, but it just gives you the opportunity to be like, hey, I just need a moment. And then it gives you a chance to like have the words that you want to use, instead of being like, yes or no. It could be like, hey, so I'm trying this new thing where I'm trying to have more boundaries, and I'm wondering maybe you could help me with that. When you ask someone, can you help me with this? They're going to be like, hell yeah. So if you're like, I'm really working on my boundaries, would you mind if they'd be like, yeah, let me help you. So give it a pause. Think about how you want to like verbalize your response to the people around you, no matter what it is. That pause will be very valuable for you.
Oh, I love that. Okay. Where can people find you? Where can people book with you?
So they can find me online, and they can book online with me. My calendar is up there. It's amyconnor.net. And I offer 30, 60, 90-minute readings. I say the hour is kind of a good option for people. 30 minutes is more of like a follow-up. And I also offer life coaching sessions for people that need a little more length and a little more information over a longer period of time. So they can find that all online.
We highly, highly recommend Amy. You're the only person I
Highly.
will give your information out to. People ask me all the time, and I literally only am like, Amy only. So that is you're my go-to.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about all of these things that sometimes feel so sticky and so hard in the moment. Laura's so right that you have a way of being like, it's sticky right now and you can do it and you can do the hard work, but it will be okay. And I don't know, I just really appreciate you and all that you do, and for me, and also just for everyone. So thank you for coming on.
I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Oh, so fun. Yay. Okay. Any closing words, guys?
Can I have a closing word?
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course.
Mallory,
Yeah.
you have baby energy around you.
Oh, fuck. Oh, fuck.
There
start crying right now.
So whenever I get baby energy around someone, it means that there's a spirit that wants to come in, whether you want to or not.
Crying right now. Okay.
So yeah. And I've gotten that quite a few times over the years. And like literally every time someone's ended up pregnant. So there's that.
I did get my IUD out 2 weeks ago. So this is
Perfect
funny timing. Ryan,
So.
did you just hear Ryan? Ryan said, did she just predict something?
Yes, Ryan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh.
So yeah, it's interesting because like if I look at like the timeline of when people give me feedback and they're like, oh my God, I got pregnant, like it's always, I don't know, within like maybe 6 months at the most. It's pretty quick. So yeah, I had a woman who I was like, you're gonna get pregnant. She's like, I don't want to get pregnant. I'm like, well, you better figure something out. And she ended up getting pregnant. And
Yes,
like
okay,
every
good.
precaution was taken under the sun. And yeah, it was so wild.
This is music to our ears. We're
Okay.
now he's
good to
also
know.
getting married in July.
Mal, your poker face right now.
I'm just processing right now, you know? It's just so funny. Like, it's so funny that you say this, Amy. I mean, obviously you're great at your job. Just because these are like conversations Ryan and I have been having so much recently. So this feels very timely that you would say this.
Yeah,
So,
it's hanging out.
yeah.
It's like, I'm here to party.
Yeah. Well, Ryan and I will have a debrief after this.
Hell yeah, let's party.
All right,
Mal.
Amy, I may book something with you soon.
Oh, I love that.
Congratulations.
Okay, all right. Let's maybe not jump into that yet. Okay.
Oh man. Okay. All right.
Oh
I'm
my
in.
God.
She's beautiful.
Oh my God, I'm
All
gonna die.